Hi, welcome to Unqork'd and Unscripted. I got my coffee here, but it's not a coffee and codeless. So this is definitely a very different episode here, and I still need the coffee. It's one of those afternoon times. And today I have the pleasure of having Howard Tullman join me for Unqork'd Unscripted. Now, Howard is like a name I've known pretty much all my life, I feel like. So I was a client of Howard's technologies. I think that's the best thing to say is when you use something and you understand it. So everything from CCC when I was MetLife CIO through watching shows he's produced, which I didn't know until I sat next to Howard at an event called the Twin Event, Rob's event in Chicago just a few weeks back, where put together an amazing panel on AI, and I was honored to sit next to Howard for that panel and that discussion, which Chatham House rules I can't talk about, but it was fun. Let's just say, and but Howard, like if I was going to sit down and basically say, what do you do now from director at Snapsheet and Keeper Inc. and what have you done in the past? Your list would be Wikipedias of Wikipedias. I've never like including writing for Inc. and the books that you've created and like I got it. So I'm gonna if you would do your if you were standing next to someone in an elevator you didn't know the elevator pitch of Howard, like what would it be? What would be your 30? I'm curious. Your 30 seconds or so.
Yeah, so a long time ago, I decided that the way to save my life was to say that I sell inflatable pool furniture and leave it at that. And then nobody follows up. Nobody says, "Oh, does that mean you have the big raft and you have the inflatable elephant?" And it just sort of saves a lot of time in terms of explanation.
I gotta ask because one of the first things we did when we raised money, we had the investors for like a celebration dinner back in 2018. We did a round the dinner, and it was like, "What was your first job?" And I remember like Dan Petroza, who's a friend for life, and his I think his first job was like he organized lemonade stands. Like, so he was like telling people where to set up and deliver supplies, and then he'd get a piece of the profit. And like, I'm like, that's what was your first job, Howard? What
So
was your
I actually, the most instructive early job I had was I was a teenager. I was younger than that, magician. And so I would do magic shows for kids' parties. That was really the first. And what was so interesting was early on, you learned to do the tricks. That was a piece of cake. You learned to be a presenter. That was pretty easy. Handling the kids was even pretty easy. It was telling the parents to stay out of your way and not interfere and try to figure out how the tricks were done and all of these things. It was managing the grown-ups that was the most challenging part of that early.
what was your favorite trick? Like, what was
I
the
My favorite
yeah.
trick was converting a what was allegedly a glass of ink, and you would take this card, and on this half it was blank, and on the other half it had a little black line, and you would dip it into this glass. Um, and in the meantime, you would turn it around. So when you took it out, it looked like you would just dip this card into a glass of ink. And then you would cover the glass with this handkerchief and lift the handkerchief off. And lo and behold, it would be now clear. It would be a glass of not only clear water, but there would be a goldfish swimming in it. And that was the first trick.
I am
Went through a fair
impressed.
amount of goldfish, by the way,
I
but
couldn't
usually
keep fish alive in tanks that we bought in the store. So I if you
no,
could
usually you'd leave the goldfish as a prize for the birthday kid. So
that is impressive. I
yeah,
like that's a good first job. I haven't heard that one yet.
yeah.
That's really good.
So
And then did you start when you started working, like were you working for a company? Did you always say I'm going to go out on my own?
no, I was
And
a trial lawyer for 10 years. I was a trial lawyer for 10 years before I decided to start CCC, as a matter of fact.
trial lawyer and where was this? What
And
location?
all over the country, I was sort of the roving asshole, I guess, if because uh, I worked for the biggest companies in America for about 10 years, and I was basically defending class actions. Okay, so we would go from country and state to state and defend Chase Manhattan or Fidelity or these kinds of people. And what I would have to do is I would go into town and try and figure out whether it made sense for the litigation to continue or to be settled. And of course, everybody in town was perfectly happy for the litigation to go on for life. I mean, the judge had like hired his brother as a referee, and the biggest law firm in town was perfectly happy to send Chase $1 million bills for the rest of time. And everybody was happy except my job was to go in and blow it up, you know. And since I was from out of town, I didn't mind saying to the judge things that none of the local guys would say because they had to live in that town, you know. So when I say the roving asshole, it was literally that. I would go in and say, we'll appeal this, or we'll, you know, do something with mandamus, or we'll, you know, settle the thing. And honestly, it literally turned out that because when all of these disputes started, Chase would go into town and say, we're going to do this real estate development. Let's hire the biggest law firm in town, and let's get the best this and the best that. And then when things would go south, and this was in the mid 70s, so there was a huge oil crisis. Where you were not alive probably at that time, but in any event,
was born.
the real estate industry blew up, and Chase, as the lender, was remote but had all these millions of dollars stuck in the ground. And the question was, you know, how do you resolve this thing? So I did that, federal trial all over the country, argued in the Supreme Court, one of our cases. And then in 1980, I retired and started CCC, which grew out of previously having developed technology when computers were literally really new to the thing, on claims management in the courts. So when you do a class action, you know, my first class action, we had 56,000 claimants. Not only do they die over the course of the litigation, but they move, and there's a million things. And when the claims would be filed, I mean, whole truckloads would come in, and there'd be some little clerk sitting in some little office, and he'd say, "What am I supposed to do with this?" And I said, "Well, you know, that's what the computer is for. We'll put this all on the computer, and we'll manage these shareholder actions." And that system was developed by us, and eventually became what now is, I don't know, a Schroeder Trust or something. Whatever you now get when you get these indecipherable notices about a class action that you are theoretically a party to, but it happened 9 years ago, and you know the only people that are going to make out are the lawyers, you know, representing
Correct.
you. So anyway.
You know, it's really interesting. So I am like, to me, I look at industries, and legal is one of those. Not all parts of legal, but there are parts of legal like you're describing where the longer the case goes on, the more money the lawyers make. And
Absolutely.
it's just,
No, absolutely.
and you're right. And even the judges, they're friends with the lawyers, so they
Well,
actually
look,
love seeing lawyers.
when I said the judge hired his brother, I mean literally his brother would be hired as the referee or something. So the court would be paying the brother as a fee, and so they wanted it to go on forever. I mean, they literally wanted it to go on forever.
You know, after this, Howard, I got to show you. There's a business that I funded. Just it hasn't yet we announced, but it's all about like how do you remove all that friction from the courts and legal
Sure.
without, you know, and just it changed the model. It's so interesting that even healthcare, I hate to say this, but healthcare also, the more money they make, the worse you are
Yeah.
as a
Well,
patient, right?
look, healthcare.
Yes.
I mean, I just did a talk in Boston for a couple of thousand people, literally, who make all the rules for high school athletes. And it was a really interesting crowd. But in the course of that, one of the things we talked about was the fact that our medical system, our health system, is focused on the 2 days out of the 365 that you're in the hospital or in your doctor's office. And Apple and the new wave of health technologists want to focus on keeping you well rather than treating you when you're sick. But right now, the
Yes.
whole healthcare system is based on just the opposite. It's like, how much can I charge you for virtually everything, you know, and your
It's
life?
exactly, yeah. It's the more they work, the worse you are.
Well,
That's
and
the exact.
JP Morgan just said that they eliminated in 1 year 360,000 hours of lawyer time, and the tasks can now be done by AI and by, you know, remote systems and things. And that was all boilerplate. But I mean, you know, they were perfectly happy to take the same piece of paper and treat it as if it was brand new, written on a tablet somewhere, and charge you as if, and all they would be doing is changing most of the names and typically forgetting to change a name or two. And you'd say, well, who is Rosemary? I don't have any children named Rosemary. And well, the will must have been, so.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I've had those mailed to me. Dear, enter name here.
yeah,
Like I've seen those letters. Like dear,
sure,
enter name
sure.
here, or dear last name, and that is so. So Howard, go back to CCC.
Yeah,
So this is it's a $8 billion public company, and even in the toughest market we're in now, and thousands of employees, extremely successful. What was the technology you used in the beginning, and what made you think, hey, computers could be useful here? Like, what was the, yeah,
well, first of all, I'll have to show you because it's what you said before we started about being really small and doing everything yourself. The first thing we created for CCC was a procedural manual. We didn't have a company or anything, but we thought the best prop that you could possibly have would be this good-looking manual of how you would operate in terms of helping to resolve claims and things like that. And we did a lot of that. We did a lot of stuff to create, sort of credibility and everything else. But the insight on as to CCC, which by the way was the subsequent insight into about 6 other businesses, was the way that valuations of vehicles was historically determined. Was using these books that called the Red Book and the Black Book and whatever, and once a quarter they would come out, and by some exotic process they would determine the value of a vehicle, and then there would be modest adjustments. But the truth is they had no idea of what the value of the vehicle was in each of these individual markets. And so we said we can gather information from real dealers using real inventory in real locations, localize it, and make it available to the insurance industry. So when you settle a claim, it'll be based on actual information and the availability of comparable vehicles. And that was revolutionary in a lot of different ways. It was revolutionary because we were able to go to car dealers and say, you should be part of our system because we're going to bring you business. We're going to bring you people, and you're going to know that they're good leads because A, they've lost their car, and B, they have a check from the insurance company. So what more could you ask for? And on the insurance side, we said, you've been subject to being beaten over the head or having your adjusters beaten over the head by claimants who come in and say that their car was the finest car ever made in that year, that in their trunk they had 7 sets of golf clubs, and their vehicle had 3 miles, although it was 10 years old, and all these things. You need an objective, independent way that your adjuster can say, well, here's what the computer says, and end of story. And so they eventually, the whole world bought into that, and that's basically where the system sits today.
that's amazing, amazing, and that's how I've known. I got to know Snapshoot as well, which I believe is also part of
Yeah,
your family there.
sure.
You created an incubator,
Yeah,
1871.
right.
Why?
So
What was
1870.
that? Why did you call it that, by the way? What was
Well,
the reason for the name?
that's the year of the Chicago fire. Okay.
Okay.
So you would think that would be one of the stupider things you could possibly name a new startup incubator for new ventures. But post the fire was this huge period of innovation in Chicago, rebuilding, invention, the Ferris wheel, the skyscraper, the Tootsie Roll, all kinds of really critical things. And so 1871 was that spirit. It was going to bring a new wave of technology and innovation to the city. And so that's where the name came from.
And I got it. So, like, there's a mutual friend, Steve, who created Cameo under, I believe,
Right.
with
Yeah.
the incubator.
Right.
What are the other companies we might know out of the incubator?
Well,
Because that
Spot
is an
Hero,
amazing
Spot Hero, which this
spot
year
hero. Wow.
do about 2 billion parking opportunities this year. Um, And we had 500 startups, okay, and over the years, they've grown into just a variety of different kinds of things. We have a company called that I'm very excited about called Dumbstruck, which is telling advertisers whether their advertising is going to work or not. It's a really interesting thing.
Okay.
It uses all
How
this
does it,
technology. Well,
how does it do it?
they run
I
their
guess.
ads. They run their ads in front of a panel, and of course, distributed now. You don't. It's not 12 people in a room, uh, steak dinner if they give their feedback, but they're able to build a panel nationwide overnight and play on your screen, play ads for you, and watch your eyes and watch your reaction, which is much more meaningful than anything you might say, and turn that into literally second by second information about this works, this doesn't work, all of these kinds of things. And it's a very broad spectrum. We had a company that was giving video tours of college campuses, which in the world of COVID, it was a staggeringly wonderful thing. But frankly, it was a wonderful thing for parents way back when. Instead of going to 6 different colleges, they could sit with their kid in front of a video conference and have a local student at whatever college it was take them around campus. I mean, these were and it was a very interesting, very sort of compelling thing. They've shifted now to doing all kinds of video focus groups, product testing, and things like that. So, really
Yeah.
across the board. Um,
Yeah. And what's the advice you give to entrepreneurs then within your family? Like, what's the like? And I'd love to hear like the from the 500 startups, which is crazy to think.
there's a whole list. Okay. The first thing is, if I were going to go through the standard 10 commandments, if you will, number one is you don't get what you wish for, you get what you work for. Okay. And
I
we're
like that.
all about work. Number two would be tell a simple story. President Clinton used to say, put the jam on the lowest shelf, make it accessible, make it easy, make it, something that everybody can understand. Number three has a lot to do with focus. So do a few things really well, okay, and don't try to do everything. Don't try to be a mile wide and an inch deep, or try to be all things for all people. Number four is keep raising the bar. Okay, I mean, there's nothing more important to innovation than iteration and trying to constantly get a little better. And our motto is, better on Friday than Monday. It's a pretty simple proposition. Aim high. Right from Michael Jordan. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Don't sell yourself short. Have confidence. A lot about persistence and perseverance, about picking yourself up when you fall down. I'll tell you an astonishingly interesting statistic. And so, since I did this talk in Boston and they were all jocks, I gave them this thing from a speech that Roger Federer gave. Okay. Roger Federer played 1,546 singles matches in his career. He won 80% of them. How many shots do you think he won? Okay, in other words, individual points. He won
Yeah.
54%. In other words, he lost half of the points. But the idea was in-game amnesia. You can't look backwards. You've got to keep going
You got to
forward.
keep moving forward. Yeah. How many mistakes when you were creating your companies, like the amount of mistakes you made, you can't look back. You just got to learn from, right, and move
Yeah,
forward.
well,
It's
you have to get started somewhere, and that's important too. Start with what you have. I mean, it's not going to be perfect. Your team isn't going to have everybody you need. Nothing is going to be perfect. But if you don't get started, you're never going to get there. And you have to make room
yeah,
for all kinds of people. Because the truth is that creativity and innovation and stuff is a package deal. And so some of these people are not familiar with bathing. Some of these people want to work only in the middle of the night. There's a lot of room and if you're the boss, you have to sort of run interference for these people, because otherwise, they'll sort of sink to the lowest common denominator.
I like
Blame.
the hard work and
We don't.
ethics. That's a
We
key
don't.
thing.
We don't
Yeah.
deal with. We don't believe in blaming people. We believe in sort of working through the circumstances. And if you blame other people, you sort of give up your ability to make change. And make it okay to make mistakes. You mentioned mistakes before. I mean, the truth is, we think that it's okay to fail, except in two cases. One is failing to ask for help, and the other one is failing to give help when somebody else asks you for it. And, we we do a lousy job in the movies and TV and all these things of teaching our kids to be, gunslingers and heroes and never to ask for help. That's like embarrassing and shameful. And the truth is, if you want to build a successful business, it's a team, and you need to get the help and the support of the people who, have your back. So perfectly fine to make mistakes. In fact, if you don't make mistakes, you're probably never going to be successful beyond a certain extent. And then, go ahead. All right.
No, that's awesome. That is,
And then
and I like the idea of failure.
last thing I would say to you is, because the only other thing that's pretty clear, and I think this is from Clay Christensen, who said, it's much easier to stick to 100% of your values than 98% of your values. So, you need to have two things. You need to have values. If you don't have values, you can't really create value. And two, you need to basically make something that makes a difference. I mean, if you spend your whole life doing something that really doesn't matter, I think that's a major failure. So, I like to feel that our businesses all across the board, I mean, we had, one whole part of our incubator were veteran businesses. Another part were female businesses. Another part were Hispanic businesses. And, it's very touchy in these times to use filters like that. And yet that would be the only way that you could, get critical mass and get the kind of support you needed. But if you were running a traditional venture fund and you said, I'm going to filter it by any of these sort of metrics, that you can't do that. I mean, the truth is you have to filter it by the best idea. And so we took one step back because we thought we also had to serve other populations and give them opportunities, even if that wasn't the absolute best killer, idea in the whole world.
And what would you say, Howard, like looking back, like, okay, what would be the example, either the outcome or what it achieved or what it did for someone that you would say most meaningful to you at this moment, or a few of them, maybe the top three, but just what stands out in your mind with all?
The thing that always you talk about verklempt, whatever, the thing that I have never been able to successfully tell as a story in any public forum, but that was really the most shocking was Chicago has this event where once a year you volunteer to go repaint a wall in a school or clean something up or, just sort of civic service.
Yes.
So one of our teams went to a CPS school, Chicago Public School, and they were told they were going to paint these 3 walls in a stairwell, and they were going to also take this stencil and this of math skills. It had a guy with a plus and a minus and a divided and whatever. They were going to take this stencil and they were going to stencil it on the newly painted wall. And the only problem was, which we learned, when we got there and we saw the stencil, was they were all guys. They were all guys. All the stencils were little men, little gray men. So I have the before and after picture, and I will send it to you because it's the most amazing thing, because the team adapted the dress and added dresses and added hair and did a few other things. And lo and behold, it was a multi-gender, sort of multi-ethnic 5 people instead of these 5 gray guys. And I'm sure everywhere else in the Chicago public school system, it's the same ugly stencil on the same, beat up wall. So that to me was, and they did it completely on their own initiative. They did it because it was important to them. And it was really one of the most, exciting and sort of rewarding things, So.
I love it. I love it. It's improv. You're right. Pivot, stay true to yourself and be willing to pivot, right? That's what it was.
The other thing I would tell you is that we worked, when we started CCC, we worked right across the street from a Greasy Spoon. There was a kid who ran the grill there. You couldn't even keep up with how crazy and fast he was and everything else. We decided he was our kind of people, so we hired him. And 15 years later, I get notes from these people saying, I now have 2 kids. You gave me this opportunity, and I'm now a business person, and all these things. So those come back. I mean, 20, 30, 40 years later, they still come back, and they're still really important because ultimately it's not what you get out of it; it's what you're able to give other people, and that's how you really learn as well.
Any idea how many jobs you would have created over the years? I'm just
So,
curious.
so I would say the last time we tried to do that math, because a lot of that original crew also went to run a number of businesses. I think we say it's around 12,000 in Chicago. So
Holy cow.
yeah,
Wow.
so
It's interesting. Like when I grew up in the corporate world, so 25 years climbing that corporate ladder, and um, all the principles you said play out. Everything is the same, by the way. You should feel you got to take the chance. There is I know there's one bank whose entire morale that I know is there is if you point out the issue, you get credit.
right,
Right. It's like, no, no, if you fix the issue,
right,
it's like, and so like you had to apply, like it's so relevant to all of that. And I kind of felt like before I created Unqork, I hadn't really created jobs. It
yeah,
was really interesting. I might have moved work around. I might have moved work from Northeast to South as we built the Raleigh campus and
sure,
we hired thousands of engineers, but the jobs were, but like to really create something, it's entirely new and different. And it is one of the most exciting things to see that first job. And I'll never forget, we an employee who's still with us, one of our first hires, maybe the top 5 or 6, and like we gave her the offer on the spot. It was one of these, just it's here waiting for you. Like,
right.
and I remember that feeling of I always wanted to do that. I never could do that. I had to go through HR and compliance, and like and then get background checks and I-9s and all this. And it was just such a fun
The
experience.
other the other thing that that I think is really important, and we had talked about education and entrepreneurship before. We built several systems to train young people to be entrepreneurial, and it turns out that that's a good hook. But the truth is, they're life skills. They're not entrepreneurial skills. They're life skills about paying attention and being the go-to person, the first in line, not the last resort, all of these kinds of things. So we built a system to train kids in sixth and seventh grade at a high school. We built a system to have other kids come and run a little city that we built out. So they took and did real jobs. And the feedback from them and their parents, who were often also came as chaperones and things, was completely off the charts. I mean, it was life changing. And this is sort of a prejudice that even today we're continuing to do, and that is, it used to be that the two ways out of the ghetto, if you will, were rock or jock. And what's so exciting to me is that every jock now and every rock star will tell you that they're an entrepreneur. It's not even a close question. And so you've got Jay-Z, you've got these people who are willing to vouch for the fact that it's cool to be in school, it's cool to be paying attention. And one of our schools that we built was a digital media college, and all we did was, instead of saying English, we said, "This is your script." Instead of saying algebra, we said, "This is the budget for your video." And you make a few tweaks, and all of a sudden, you can re-excite kids about learning. And right now, when kids go and tell you that school is the most boring place they go, it's just heartbreaking. And so we're still pursuing different ways to try and up the ante in terms of making education challenging and exciting and worthwhile for these kids.
I like it. It was so rewarding. I was part of this. It was called Here to Here Career Wise. It was how do you give 16-year-olds in the difficult situations, difficult schools, a job for a few hours a week, just apprenticeships.
Sure.
And you see the kids want to do more. Like it's amazing. I had one of these kids. I never forget, Howard. I basically said, because Jamie Dimon was kind of the chair of this organization, and you had the CEOs of Accenture, and everyone was there. And I said, the one apprentice that was working for Unqork, I said, he's been working on real projects. Like he's not, it's no BS. He's not,
Yeah, right.
but like, and so I said, you know what? He's going to present to the council what he's been doing the past 6 months, and he's going to go in front of and literally the morning of, I said, is he at school? Yes. Is he out? I'm tracking this kid down because and he shows up like perfectly calm, and he goes in front of literally a room of like 40 executives. He sits next to Jamie Dimon, and he presents, and it was, one of the execs came up after, and she goes, "You look like a proud father in that moment. You look like I'm like, but that's what it's like. That's what it's about." And
Well,
he's in college now. He's doing great. Yeah.
you talk about that. I mean, Joe Biden is going to take, infinite crap for the next month or so. But one of the most important things I think she did was to continue her job as a teacher and to get out of the White House bubble and to go meet real people in terms of teaching classes and being exposed to the real world. And it's true, I mean, a lot of these kids that there are a couple of programs in Chicago that bring kids down from various schools for jobs that are even clerical jobs, but these are kids that have never been in an elevator. These are kids that don't even understand the concept. I mean, I taught at Disney once, and they told me this great story that for the longest time, when people didn't show up to class, they would call them at home or track them down, and they'd say, you're not in school, and you need to call and let us know. And the people they would call would say, well, I'm not there because I'm not there. It was like, no, you don't understand the concept here. We need to have you here. We need to know what you're doing. So, but education, look, healthcare you mentioned before, and education are the two scariest parts right now of our economy, and we're doing a lousy job in both, really. I mean, and I don't know what we're going to see. I mean, I was with somebody last night talking about Ozempic and these semi-glutides or whatever they are, and to think that those are already being given to kids, that parents who were previously freaked out about orthodonture are now giving them to their kids because they think they're obese or something. I mean, you're putting these kids on a lifetime drug at the age of 10 years old. I mean, it's really frightening, but it's going to change our world. I mean, when you have every celebrity saying I lost 50 pounds in 10 minutes, and that's the messaging that's going out about these things, it's really scary. And, we have nobody in healthcare who is responsible other than maybe Fauci. Maybe he could take this up as a cause, but the messaging that's coming out to these kids about vaping and about these other things is insane. I mean, it's just really frightening.
We have an Unqork company called Spatial Health, and the whole concept there was, it's something one of my babies, and it's like when you talk about like it's something passionate, but it's just how do you enable any doctor or medical practice or practitioner, anyone that actually figured out something that works in medical, and enable them to be basically almost like their own store owner in Amazon, where suddenly the whole world are their patients.
Right.
So like, just because we're still medicine, it's really interesting. I went this with my son's allergy program, which he successfully completed. And that's what sponsored this. That's where the idea came from. But like, we're still restricted by the physical limitation of a doctor's office as
Yeah.
opposed to the world.
Yeah.
And it's digital. It's like, why are we restricted in these days of digital? And like, that's the first thing, is when you open that up, then you're almost adding a little bit of capitalism into a world that could use it to get the right benefit for the customer, the patient. It's not and it's exciting. It's nice to see it, but I would love to see it move faster.
Well, when I was in Boston, I went to the mall there. They have several fabulous malls, and one of as I'm walking through the mall, there's a doctor's office there, and it's it's a new concept that you just walk in, and it's not every kind of thing, obviously, but I think urgent care is going to explode, and hopefully at least make it possible for more care to be distributed and available. So this thing has this thing. It says technology has changed everything except your doctor's office until now, and it's called Forward, and it's literally
Oh,
a
I love it.
doctor's office in the mall, because that's where the people are. I mean, it's
I love it. I
yeah.
love the concept. That's so Howard, like just a few more questions, because we're running. We could go all day, and I don't want to get into politics, but
Right.
we've had Howard and I have great conversations on politics and business and family. Like this is and right before this, as Howard said, he was asking my team who produces this show, and it's my team. It's like there's no one else in my group. I used the words with Howard, like we're kind of scrappy still. We're still like we're a few hundred employees, but we are definitely scrappy in how we think, and we want to be. We want to be like that feeling. But what favorite book that you didn't write? I'm curious. What would you recommend if
I'm
there's
just
one book?
reading. I'm just reading. It's downstairs, but there's a fabulous teacher at Harvard who was married to a guy who was a speechwriter for uh, Kennedy and then Lyndon Johnson. I'm going to blank on her name. Doris, somebody. Is this Kearns? Doris Kearns. This is a memoir of her husband's time in the 60s. And she's just the smartest lady that I could imagine.
Wow.
But anyway, I'm reading that. And then I'm reading junk books all the time on the treadmill. I mean, I read like 1,000, of the typical summer escapist kinds of things.
Oh, I like it. I
Yeah.
like it. And then your own books. Which book would you say if
I
someone
think
wants to
I
get?
think that the best book is still what I did is I took the first 300 of my ink columns and put them into a compilation called "You Can't Win a Race with Your Mouth," and that's I think if you dip into there, there's something for literally for everybody. So
That's amazing.
that's what I would
That is,
recommend.
and on technology, what's the most exciting thing? I should say other than AI, but of course AI is part of this. But what do
All
you
right, so
think?
let me just say exactly her name. So her exact name is Doris Kearns Goodwin, and her
Awesome.
book is called An Unfinished Love Story, and it's about uh, for 50 years or something. Her husband, when a long story short, when Bobby Kennedy was killed, her husband went into the deepest kind of depression and just closed off and everything. She was still teaching, I think, at Harvard at the time. And for like 15 or 20 years after that, until he passed away, all his files, all his records were in all these banker's boxes, but unlooked at or whatever. When he got sick, and it was the last couple of years of his life, she suggested that they go through the boxes together. And so that's what this is. This memoir is based on everything that he lived through with Johnson and Kennedy and all the things in the 60s. It's amazing, sort of an amazing.
I love it. I'm gonna go. That might be my summer reading.
Yeah,
That's very
it's
good.
it's a very touching book. And in terms of the technology, I'm most interested in Meepo, Meepo. So
Tell me.
Meepo are these
Yeah.
tiny little gelatin cubes, literally that size, and that contains an entire meal, all the protein you need, all the carbohydrates you need. And not only are they manufacturing these things in little packets, which are already in space, by the way, they're already using them in NASA. And frankly, this craziness where we're having giant airplanes fly over Gaza to try and get food
Drop.
when
Yeah.
these little packets don't require heating, they're edible, and they can be changed to supplement your protein requirements, your nutrition requirements. And in fact, what they have that's mind bending, they give you a Q-tip, you swab your mouth, you stick the Q-tip into this machine, and it 3D prints a cube that needs and matches your exact requirements in terms of where you have any deficiencies in terms of stuff. So we're going to see it in sports, we're going to see it everywhere, but it's all part of this. It's got to be fast, it's got to be easy, it's got to be convenient, and it's got to be immediately accessible. So I'm very excited about these people. They're little meal cubes. So
Oh, I love I mean, end hunger in that
yeah,
case. Like
yeah,
if they're cheap
yeah.
enough
Well,
where
and by the way, they're like a tenth of the cost and about 50th of the weight of a MRE, which is what the military thinks of when they talk about meal packs and stuff like that. All of which taste
it's
like
amazing. Yeah, and as an entrepreneur, like you could get very into something and forget about eating. And you
yeah,
could
yeah.
literally like that's everyone is like, do you live to eat or eat to live? And I'm like,
Well, listen, the sports world, space is going to drive this for sure, but the sports world is going to drive it also because it wasn't too many years ago that the Cubs would go into a city and they'd give each of their players $20 and say, go get a pizza somewhere. I mean,
yes,
baseball never figured out the training table. At least the football guys figured that out, at some point in time. So I think we're going to see a revolution in food that's going to be off the charts. And I think
I love
I think kids will take these to school. This is this whole thing about if you don't eat a decent breakfast, you're screwed in school because your brain is not. So the thought that they could give the kids, one of these little cubes when they got to school in the morning, because a lot of these kids don't eat breakfast for sure. I think is the kind of
Oh,
stuff that.
and the idea of 3D printing it, we're getting close to the Jetsons then, except in Jetsons, it would look like a whole meal that came out of the machine
Right,
when you click the
right.
button. But It's if it has the same effect, then who cares?
Yeah,
And
yeah, it's all
like
numbers. It's all data.
it's all numbers. It's awesome. So Howard, we could go on for hours. I so much appreciate you joining us here on Unqork'd Unscripted, and really getting to know you has been amazing. And I appreciate
Well,
all the time you give.
thanks for the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next time I'm out your way.
Awesome. Thanks, Howard. Thanks everyone for joining. Take care. Bye.